Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another instalment of 1984 Lore, and today we consider another mystery of the book. Just what does the chief antagonist of Orwell's classic work do as a job? In the novel, O'Brien acts as a double agent for the Thought Police, using his own strange connection to Winston as bait to lure our hero into incriminating himself further. O'Brien then leads Winston's interrogation and curing process himself, successfully breaking and remoulding Winston into a good party comrade. Yet can we really say these actions are necessarily his daily work? As a member of the inner party, Oceania's elite ruling class, this does seem a bit lowball. Would such a man really be intimately involved in such a relatively minor case? Well, I think the key to understanding why O'Brien would involve himself with Winston in particular, and others like him, is key to reconciling how, yes, O'Brien could still be a high-ranking member of the party, while seemingly getting involved in particular cases of thought crime. One key thing to understand moving forward is that personal involvement in rehabilitating thought criminals is very likely common for inner party members, given the motivations and structure of the society they inhabit. I can say this as O'Brien himself, ironically enough, during the interrogation of Winston, explains what power is and why the inner party craves it. Indeed, this is an essential thing to understand if we're to comprehend precisely why a man like O'Brien, or any inner party member for that matter, involves themselves in such grim work. This more widely too explains why the particular structure of oceanic society exists at all. As I've explored the concept of power in other videos, it's sufficient here to say that power itself is the end or desired objective of every inner party member, and hence of the society as a whole which they control. Power, O'Brien explains, is in shaping the minds of people like Winston, or, as he darkly puts it, quote, in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Here we see then that O'Brien's involvement in Winston's curing may not necessarily be his dedicated job in and of itself. It could very well be standard practice for the typical inner party member. Though not canon, Sandra Newman in her 2023 novel Julia seems to confirm this idea. Please by the way click onwards to the timestamp displayed to avoid spoilers, though what I'm about to say is a minor one at best. In her novel, it's clear that other inner party comrades have similar relationships with other outer party dissidents in mirrors to O'Brien's own. Julia herself witnesses a very similar scene to Winston's own "they got you too" moment, with the black uniformed guards beating the outer party comrade, while the inner party man sparks up a cigarette and nonchalantly observes. This is one area where I feel this is very plausible. It certainly ties in with what we know about power itself, and also makes a lot of sense given the likely ratio of relationships it would take to sustain such a nightmare system. The inner party are just 2% of oceanic society, and the outer party are much larger, at around 13%, meaning we have a rough ratio of 13 to 2, or about 1 to 6 or 7, give or take. If we further reasonably assume that not all outer party members are obviously arrested and interrogated, at least not all in the same time period, these numbers become more manageable. I imagine that the actual ratio is much closer to something like 3 or 2 to 1, with most inner party comrades having just 1 or 2 cases at any one time. I suspect too, given examples from the novel, that not all cases of thought crime are equal. Winston was admittedly a difficult case according to O'Brien himself, whereas a case like Parsons or Syme would not be for different reasons. I've covered in the past why I think both of these men would not be classed as much of a threat as Winston, so I won't tarry much here on this issue. It suffices to say that Syme and Parsons appear mostly orthodox. In Syme's case, his problem is his frankness and intellect that could lead himself and others to thought crime. Parsons, if he really did say what his daughter claims he did, seems to have had a deep subconscious aversion to the party, and certainly nothing as serious as Winston or Julia's rebellion, in my opinion. The point here is that such cases would not take up months of time, as is likely the case with the Winstons of the world, which again reduces the numbers of truly threatening cases further. My overall point then is that O'Brien's role in Winston's interrogation is very likely not his sole job. At the beginning of the book, Winston himself is unsure as to O'Brien's actual role, thinking he was a, quote, holder of some post so important and remote that he only had a dim idea of its nature. Unfortunately for us, Winston does not elaborate on this. What we can say is that O'Brien's presence in the Ministry of Truth implies his role lies in some senior position there, rather than in the Ministry of Love, where we later see him. That he leads Winston's interrogation, as we have seen, does not necessarily pin him to any particular role in mini-love. Another possibility, of course, is that O'Brien is a member of the Thought Police itself, and that his vague role at Mini-True is simply a cover position to attract thought criminals to him. If O'Brien's role is dedicated to tackling thought crime, above and beyond just exercising his power, then does this mean he is actually a relatively junior inner party member? I say this as we go back to the idea that, realistically, why would a busy member of the ruling class be intimately involved in the case of a relative nobody like Winston? Well, as I've said, such involvement may simply be a normal routine for any inner party member, but it's also true that O'Brien himself does not physically punch, kick, or do the more close-up violent acts Winston suffers. O'Brien is more of a dark conductor. The closest to physical direct harm he inflicts is in his use of the machine itself with the dials. Unfortunately too, even if O'Brien was directly involved at this base level, the man physically abusing Winston along with the guards, this in itself does not necessarily translate to him not being a high-ranking inner party member. We know that Lavrenti Beria, for example, Stalin's once chief of the NKVD, did torture and murder people with his own hands, while also sexually assaulting many young girls throughout his dark career. This was also the case with Yezhov, his predecessor too, who also got physically involved during the Great Purges. Another horrid example right at the top of the pyramid is the regime of Idi Amin, who apparently got directly involved in the violence, personally torturing people and usually finishing them off with a sledgehammer. Such base violence then is not beneath some individuals, even at the heights of power in similar regimes in our world. Given O'Brien's character, however, this just doesn't seem to fit. If anything, Winston's perception of O'Brien suggests a far more sophisticated, if equally cruel individual. O'Brien's impressive physical stature is offset by his sheer charisma and sense of nobility. Personally, I believe O'Brien is probably a senior figure within the Thought Police itself, and if not, then a high-ranking party member at least. I base this assertion on two related points. Firstly, as I've already covered, O'Brien appears to specialise in difficult cases. Secondly, and related to this, is his involvement in the much earlier and high-profile interrogation and curing of Jones, Aronson and Rutherford. I think it's here that we're on firmer ground when we say O'Brien must be quite important given his involvement in this set of cases, and way back in the mid-1960s no less. I think it's worth recalling the particular relevant quote from Part 3 to really crystallise our understanding here. Quote, "No one whom we bring to this place ever stands out against us. Everyone is washed clean, even those three miserable traitors in whose innocence you once believed, Jones, Aronson and Rutherford. In the end we broke them down. I took part in their interrogation myself. I saw them gradually worn down, whimpering, grovelling, weeping. And in the end, it was not with pain or fear, only with penitence. By the time we had finished with them, they were only the shells of men. There was nothing left in them except sorrow for what they had done, and love of Big Brother. It was touching to see how they loved him. They begged to be shot quickly, so that they could die while their minds were still clean." His voice had grown almost dreamy. The exaltation, the lunatic enthusiasm was still in his face. So there's a lot here. Firstly, it's vital to emphasise the role of these men. As Winston explains earlier in the novel, Jones, Aronson and Rutherford, were the last three true rivals to Big Brother, who were arrested and cured in around 1965. So we know then that this trio were certainly no joke, and perhaps could have been Big Brothers themselves had events played out differently. Perhaps then only Goldstein himself would have been as important an enemy to deal with as these three men. Given Winston estimates O'Brien's age at around 48 to 50, that means O'Brien was involved in these high-profile cases when he was in his late 20s or early 30s. No small achievement. The language of the quote also implies that these men too were difficult cases. They were gradually worn down, implying it took a while to break these men. This seems likely as one does not tend to rise to such leadership positions without a degree of ego and ability, which means such strong characters would be hard to break. My point here is that O'Brien's involvement in their rehabilitation is certainly impressive. Perhaps he was a rising star of the party at the time, a young and fanatical supporter of BB, eager to purge the party of reactionary Goldsteinite influences, even if they were just imagined. It's certainly intriguing to think about anyway. In any case, I don't think such a task would have been given to just anybody. O'Brien's relative importance is therefore heavily implied by this small bit of information about his past. That his face is also described as having become almost dreamy also indicates that this is no empty statement. O'Brien really is reliving the time he spent breaking and curing these important rebels. So based on all of this, I think we can at least conclude two things about Winston's nemesis. Firstly, O'Brien is likely a specialist, a man trusted with the more difficult cases of thought crime as we have seen. Or perhaps another way of looking at it is he's privileged to be given these cases. Secondly, given his work and his past involvement in the curing of Jones, Aronson and Rutherford, I believe he is a senior inner party member, though perhaps not quite at the right-hand man or ministerial level, but perhaps close. Maybe O'Brien is akin to a senior chief constable in the ranks of the Fort Police, or at least has that kind of power. Anyway, those were my thoughts on the true work of 1984's chief antagonist. But what do you all think? Is O'Brien a senior inner party member, or do you think he was simply a glorified torturer? Not very important at all. Let everyone know in the comments, and remember, Big Brother is watching you.